So you've allowed hope and excitement to build only to be dashed. There's only so many times before we learn the lesson that don't allow yourself to be hopeful and happy and excited, because it ends in disappointment. So again, that's towards that cynicism end of the spectrum of, if I don't allow myself to be excited, if I expect the worst at all times, well, I could be pleasantly surprised, things could go well, but I'm not going to be dashed if it goes badly. So I'll set that as my expectation.
Episode 18 with Edward. Edward is a returning guest, and on this episode we talk predominantly about shadow work. Bear with me on this one because I really did put myself out there. We were talking about the shadow self, and I thought it was a good idea to use myself as an example. And as you can tell if you watch the episode, there was many times where I was just completely stopped in my track. But I thought, you know what? This show's about putting out the best content I can. I want to be as open and honest with everything as possible as well. And the easy thing to do would have been to edit those parts out or even not post the episode. But I thought, you know what? Let's get it out there. It could help others who are in a similar position to me. And I think men's mental health is something that's not spoken up about enough. So, yeah, hopefully you enjoy. Be gentle with me on this one. And yeah, I'm hoping there's some value. So, as always, please like, share, and subscribe if you find the value in what we're doing. It really does help the channel. And yeah, I'll see you on the other side.
Right, Edward, thank you for coming back on. I really appreciate it. We're going to jump straight in on this one. We're going to call this interview the shadow work. And we spoke before you coming on, and we discussed how, well, I begged you to come on to really kind of go into this whole topic. And I'm hoping that we can put together like a really comprehensive chat here that can, you know, cut through a lot of the noise and, yeah, be really effective for people once they kind of get through it, get through the information, if it's a topic that they're looking into. So should we start with what is the shadow self?
Okay, so the way I think about it is that we all create a mask to interact with the world. So we have a version of ourselves that we create for public consumption. And it might be funnier than you normally are, but people think of you as the funny one. So you're always laughing and smiling because you have that expectation. So we create this version of ourselves because we fear that our authentic self might be rejected, because sometimes we're impatient, or sometimes we're intolerant, or whatever parts of us that we think might be rejected, they don't get included in that version of ourselves that we create that goes off and interacts with the world. The persona, a mask. The problem with that is when we tell a joke and we're out there in the world as our mask, the person laughs at our joke, but it's not really us telling the joke, it's the mask telling the joke. So we're in the background thinking, but if they knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me. So we never feel satisfied or feel like the acceptance that we do receive in the world actually belongs to us. We're being inauthentic. And so what I see as shadow work is recognizing your true self. And I mean, Carl Jung would say that the further that you are from your mask, so the bigger the difference between the mask version of you and the real version of you, the bigger that difference is, the less happy, fulfilled, and sane you are, because you never get life's fulfillment. You never get happiness, real, like say, fulfillment in life, because it's not you out in the world that's interacting with the world. It's only your representative that's been made for public consumption. And so shadow work is somehow integrating the less pleasant yet real parts of you that exist, synthesizing your mask and your real you, and making a whole version of you that can go out in the world and is actually who you really are. And thus you might get rejection, you might get acceptance. Some people will like you, some people will not. But at least they're meeting the real you. Whereas if you leave that version of you that's in your mind flawed and will not be accepted, when you leave that at home and no one ever meets that, then that real you never gets satiated by the world or life or any parts of the journey, because it never really interacts with the world. It's only ever your mask. So the shadow work is acknowledging and synthesizing that real you into who that mask is, and making a whole being rather than just a all singing, all dancing version of you for public consumption.
So this is probably why people feel so unsatisfied and disconnected.
Yeah.
So why is it that we, I guess unconsciously, because I don't think we would consciously do this, but why do we unconsciously create this, this persona?
Fear of rejection. So you are making, as best you can and as best you can guess, a version that will be accepted by the crowd, liked by the boss, will find a mate. And so because we have a lack of faith in ourselves and a fear of being alone, we think, well, it's better to leave. And I say we think, we don't consciously think this. But what happens is, if there is a side of you that you think will get you ostracized, you don't present that side of you, obviously. If you're, bigoted because you had a close friendship, a close relationship with granddad, and he's a bit of a racist, and you've picked up some traits, fine well that if you go into 21st century Britain and start running your mouth about these ignorant thoughts, then you're not going to get a girlfriend, make friends, get promoted or whatever. So you leave that side of you at home. Now that's maybe quite an extreme example, but yeah, that's kind of what's happening, that there's part of us that fears rejection, and that part of us filters out what we allow the public to see about us or the world to see about us. And so we amplify bits that aren't quite as, like the funny guy maybe has a hard day, but he has an expectation that when he walks into work, he's always cracking jokes and things like that. So he amplifies that bit so that people at work smile when they see him. And so often these people are crying before they go to work, and then they paint on the big smile, and then they come in and it's Mr. Clown arriving to give everyone a jolly. But that's not who they are. That's the part of them that they think will get them the acceptance and the love in the broadest sense of the word.
Do you think that this is mainly built up from childhood, and then maybe added to as you age?
Yes, I think, whether our parents were neglectful or conditional with love, or we build most of our framework of the world. Think about it. When you're a baby, you have no idea what the world is, what to expect, how things work. We have to model on something to build a framework and understanding of the world. So if dad works 12-hour shifts and you never see him, and he's only ever drunk when you see him late at night, and that's the only time you see your dad, there's the only example of what a man is like that you will ever experience in your childhood, when you're learning what's a man, what's a dad, so we are literally creating our worldview on what we experience, because that's the only thing we have to go on.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the shadow self, do you feel that, as you say, as a child, the foundation's really there, and it's almost this mask, this protective, persona that we've built, that we put out there into the real world? Do you think as you get older and you face other traumas, because obviously life is pretty traumatic at whatever age you are, can that be shaped and molded, or do you feel that it's really kind of there from an early age, and when you're doing this shadow work, you need to really go back and start to pick the pieces apart, from
I think it can be done. I think one thing that plays a really influential part of the journey, though, is, so we often start off naive, and I think of naivety and cynicism as a spectrum. You're at one end or the other, or somewhere on that spectrum. And so you start off and it's tooth fairies and Santa coming down the chimney, and all adults are there to protect you, and everything is wonderful, and then you go through life and unfortunately bad things happen. So people mistreated as children, and traumas galore and heartbreak from partners and all these things, and we lose faith in the world. And we sort of, part of us learns that in being naive and in trusting people or the world or partners or whomever, it leads to pain. And so we end up sliding down this line of towards cynicism, where everyone's a liar, everyone's out to get you. And I think what people do is we build like a castle wall around our heart so that nothing can come in and hurt us. But the danger of that is we don't notice that that wall that we've built to protect our heart, half the task of the heart is an action out the way. And that wall that is protecting us from harm coming in is also stopping us from interacting fully and joyfully with the world. And so that's when you become like, and we've probably all got friends and, you know, people that we know that are emotionally distant. They're not trusting, they're not willing to allow positive things to happen because they've been hardened and they are now so guarded with their feelings. And often it's because when you're in love or when you're a child, there are situations in life where you are vulnerable by default. And so when you're a small child, you're not able to control your safety, whether you eat, whether you have shelter, whether someone harms you. And so when you then get harmed, part of the brain learns when you are vulnerable, you get harmed. Damn right, I'm never going to let myself be vulnerable ever again. Our brain wants to learn generalities and learn patterns so that we can predict danger. We go through something that is the exception to the rule, like child abuse, thankfully isn't completely in all homes. However, when you're that child, you don't know that another 5 million homes that's not happening. You think that's what happens. And so you are creating a belief that that is the norm, when actually, in fact, it's the exception to the rule. And so we start to really have an inaccurate interpretation of the world due to our own individual experiences, often negative ones.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do quite often is if I ever book something in the future, like I'm getting married soon, and when we decided we're going to focus on it and start saving and, set a date and stuff like that, it's like I can't allow myself to think that far ahead and be happy. The first things that pop to my mind is, well, what if I lose my job? What if this happens? What if that happens? We booked our honeymoon, and same thing. The first thing when I'm ready to click, book on the flight, I'm thinking, well, what if I get ill and I can't go and I miss the flight? Or what if I lose my job? And, it's almost like, and I'm trying to figure out exactly why I have those fears. Maybe you can help me, maybe you know. But it's almost like as soon as I, get something booked and I really let go and feel excited and happy like a normal person, but immediately I go in anxiety mode, panic mode. What if, as I get older and I start to learn more about myself and I can control my thoughts and emotions a little better, I kind of know that it's silly, but I think those things, I'm like, Jay, just, leave it, get over it, get excited. But it's my immediate feeling and thought. Why is that?
So think of it this way. Let's say, hypothetically, not your life. Let's say mum and dad are split up and that you go to dad at the weekends. So all week, Tuesday and Wednesday, it's getting closer and Thursday is getting closer and your excitement's building and it's building and it's building. And then Saturday morning, he's meant to be picking you up and you're waiting at the window and he doesn't show up. So you've allowed hope and excitement to build only to be dashed. There's only so many times before we learn the lesson that don't allow yourself to be hopeful and happy and excited because it ends in disappointment. So again, that's towards that cynicism end of the spectrum of, if I don't allow myself to be excited, if I expect the worst at all times, well, I could be pleasantly surprised, things could go well, but I'm not going to be dashed if it goes badly. So I'll set that as my expectation.
Are you aware that actually happened to me?
No.
As a child?
Sorry.
Well, it wasn't my dad, it was my mum.
Right, okay.
So yeah, raised, well, mum and dad together, they broke up. And then, I spent weekends with my dad. I think I was only young, 3, 4 years old, and yeah, then that was it. The end of my mum. I didn't meet her again till I was 18. So yeah, from I think 3 or 4 to 18, I was just with my dad. My dad got married multiple times and multiple different women, and maybe that's the theme. Women comes in, start to get comfortable, and then they leave.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. I was just thinking of a kind of, probably it's quite a common thing that has happened to people out there. That,
And it's weird though that your mum walking out when you're free, and then you can't enjoy booking a flight. It's like how it's such a different situation, but equally, maybe the inner child, or subconsciously it's the same thing. I don't know. This is why it's so, in many ways it's quite simple, but equally it is when you apply logic to it, it can actually be quite confusing and quite hard to sort of piece together.
So quite often so you hear about being triggered, that's quite a common used term.
Yeah.
What that actually is, you hear a song and you think of a night out, or a pair of jeans that makes you think of somewhere you went, or like all the time there's a smell like, oh, my granny's house always smelled of lavender, and when I smell lavender I think of my granny. These are all sensory stimulus that are triggering an internal response in us. And so there will be, and there is in lots and lots of people and everybody, loads of triggers that are triggering, not always negative ones, but something in the outside world that will stimulate one of the senses that triggers an internal emotional response. So maybe even the act of planning a future intention is acting as a trigger for you as well when you were young. And that'll happen, the abused housewife who was told she was a rubbish cook. When she goes in the kitchen, ex-hubby could be gone and has been gone for 20 years. But when she lifts a pan, she feels worthless, stupid, and crap inside, because the feelings that were generated by her experience with that husband are still there emotionally. They're inside because those feelings are still there about what happened. And the pan is acting as the trigger, an outside world thing that's triggering an internal response.
Do you think that's why, I mean, I try not to do it so much anymore. I'm really consciously trying not to do this. But I'm definitely one of those like conspiracy theorist people that likes to predict the future. And if I'm right, I will tell you I'm right. Okay. Do you think that could be partly because I'm like, I told you it was going to go wrong? Like I'm always almost anticipating and analyzing all situations as to what can go wrong, which in some ways, like if I'm doing like business analysis or planning, is a good thing, because everything that could go wrong I've already kind of worked out in a way.
Yeah, it's handy for risk assessment.
Yeah, but it's not very handy for living your life and trying to be happy.
Not handy for being happy, no. Because what we're saying is that there was anticipation in the past and something went wrong. And now you're stuck in a loop where you keep, whenever anticipation is being involved and looking at the future, you have a negative guess, because none of us know the future. But yours is always, it will go wrong, or at least thinking a lot about what could go wrong. Yeah. So you're more concerned about the what could go wrongs than just savoring what could go right and being excited about it. Yeah. And because the risk of doing that, the risk of like honeymoon, wedding, it's going to be the best day, I'm going to have the best fun, I'll see my friends, nothing will be happier, nothing will be better. And then it rains, a car breaks down, whatever. Life just happens like that. But your hope would be dashed. So to be up there, you've got higher to fall. But if you're like, well, as long as the cars don't break down, if you're thinking about the negative all the time, yeah, great, you'll not have a big fall because you were already expecting the worst. The problem is you're spending your time down there in the thought processes of what can go wrong. There's not much joy and excitement down there.
Okay, so on that point, I had a guy, Adrian, on And Adrian, he doesn't necessarily specialize in, any specific field. He's just a guy that has got years of experience living a holistic life. He's very spiritually connected. He's just a really, top guy. And we sort of spoke about this actually. And one of the things we were talking about is, if you're anticipating the worst and the worst does happen, have you predicted it, or have you almost created it? And that's sort of the question I wanted to ask next is, if someone like me, and if we can stay on this topic actually, partly because, we're talking about my situation. So I could probably throw you some good, bits to unpack here, but I reckon that I'm not the only one who has this situation. I'd probably imagine a lot of people, would, maybe their mum, they didn't not have a relationship with their mum. It could have been anything, but I'd imagine that this is quite a regular thing that people do, struggle with. Do you think that the anticipating the worst, I'm somewhat attracting it into my life, or tripping myself up almost subconsciously, unaware, and actually causing it somehow myself? So, I've got a great example actually. Last month, absolutely smashed my target at work, brilliant. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to go telling anyone. I'm just going to enjoy it. And then I was chatting in a WhatsApp group with some mates, and I was like, do you know what, guys? I just want to say, like, I've had a great month. I've really pulled it out of the bag. And I said to my missus about it, and I was like, I shouldn't have told anyone, because now something will go wrong. And I went in the next day, and one of my deals fell through immediately. And I'm not saying necessarily I created that, but is it the expectation of that happening? I don't know. Is there something there? Maybe
we've talked briefly about manifestation before, and that essentially you create the world at the vibratory rate that you are. So if you are desperate for money, you're actually giving off scarcity vibes, not affluence vibes. So you have to be the vibration of the environment that you want to create, right?
Yeah.
So what are the vibrations that you're giving off by expecting the worst? Fear, like scarcity, calamity. That's the vibration that you're living at. So are you creating that when things go wrong? Maybe. Some people call it realism. I know someone who's very close in my life that is that way. They would rather be pleasantly surprised that something went right, but they have a baseline expectation of basically everything will go wrong that can go wrong. And I couldn't live my life like that. So purely for me, I would rather go through life with hope, and I can handle it being dashed when things don't go to plan, because my everyday is full of excitement and joy and anticipation. That's a nice experience. And then when it comes that the holiday gets cancelled because the passports aren't through or whatever, I take that on the chin.
Yeah.
And then try my best to keep going like that. Now, I'm a stubborn bugger. I think a lot of people get worn down by things that they were hoping were going to happen that end up not happening. They find that pushes them towards not having faith in the universe or in the fates or in life, because they're learning each time something goes not to plan that's the norm, that things don't go to plan. I try and doggedly defend my position inside of myself and say, well, even if I'm delusional, I'm waking up excited and smiling throughout my day and going to bed happy. So even if it's me kidding myself, I had a bloody nice day in that delusion. And really, nicer people, I was happier to be around. And actually, there is no harm to anyone else, me thinking positively all day. Only actually positive comes from it.
Have you always been that way, or did you learn that sort of behaviour?
No, I don't think I've always been that way. Probably a little part of me. But I've been through fairly dark times in my own life and stuff. But I would say the more work I've done on me, of understanding why I act the way I act, why I think the way I think, the mistakes I've made in my life, why they happened, and what basically my life was a checklist of, rather than working out what I should do in life to make it better, it was more like a checklist of, well, not that, not that, not that, not that, made that mistake, made that. And eventually, once you've made enough hundreds of mistakes, you're kind of left with what you're left that you could do, like be honest, be kind, be helpful, work hard, push yourself, try and develop yourself. And I have learned generally that, of course, bad luck happens and accidents happen, but generally there is a correlation between the more good choices you make, the better your life gets. Whether it's physically and eating well, or working out, or studying again so you can get a better job, or like any area of life, if you're willing to work through the uncomfortable bits and do the things that you should be doing more, and the things that you shouldn't be doing less of them, life improves. Even if there's a car breakdown, even if there's a death in the family, that's called life. But generally your path gets better and better the more you're willing to look into your shadow, clean up your shit, and improve yourself, and work harder in the areas that will make your life better. And they are quite identifiable.
I was going to say, would you say like maybe life beat you into this type of philosophy, or was it you started to feel this way more? Was there techniques that you used to become that sort of more optimistic, or even was it just doing the shadow work, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, that sort of cleared up a lot of these, these, I guess, poor thinking habits, or, subconscious blocks or whatever?
I think for me, probably hitting rock bottom-ish, and thinking life is, and so at some point there was a switch from everything is everyone else's fault to it's on me that X, Y, and Z has happened. Now, of course, we're not always to blame. It's not a blame game. But the more you can take responsibility and acknowledge your part in the bad things in your life, at least you've got your hands on it because you're responsible for it. So at least you've got your hands on it to make it better. Like if you're a child soldier in Africa and you're 6 years old and you're handed a gun, and if you don't do what you're told, your family are murdered, you ain't got any hand in that. That's just happening to you. But in this life, if you've lost all your friends because you drink too much, well, it isn't bad luck that you suddenly had a funny turn when you were drinking. It's a problem that you drink too much. There's, and we can go, oh, but if it hadn't happened like that, if so-and-so hadn't said that, and we're looking to blame and blame and blame and blame and blame. And as long as we're looking outside of ourselves for where the responsibility lies, we will never make our own life better.
Yeah.
Just take ownership. It's not blame, it's just ownership.
I think in some ways, and this might upset some people that have really hit a serious rock bottom, but I think sometimes it's easier to turn a corner when you do hit the bottom. It's when you've got subtle sabotaging mechanisms that are unconscious and you're not aware of why, but you think you're doing all right and you're kind of doing all right, but you kind of got this thing going on behind the scenes which is holding you back and it's beating you up inside. That is probably a harder place to start, I think. I mean, I could be wrong, than someone who's lost everything, because you can really, the problem's right in front of you now. It's in your face. Some people kind of whistle right past rock bottom and keep going. I'm not suggesting that everyone can do it, but I've seen people do it, and I know that people can do it. But I think, like I said, sometimes the issue can be when it's a subtle thing, and you're like, where do I start?
Yeah. If you are homeless, have no family, have no friends, have no job, nothing, that's a quite clear message that you have to do something. But if you are, like you're saying, say you're self-sabotaging, maybe you're drinking a bit too much, but you still get to the gym now and again, and you've still got friends, and maybe you've still got a partner, and you've still got a job, there's a level of comfort in your life that you can still get away with not looking. So of your own volition, to look at the uncomfortable bits when actually you could just keep turning a blind eye to them and trundling on through life. I think that's what you're saying, that
Yeah,
In
yeah.
some ways, it's harder when things are more comfortable.
Like with my drinking, right? I didn't really have a drinking problem. It would be maybe once a week, sometimes twice a week, sometimes I'd go a couple of weeks without a drink. I had, more psychological, I'd say, wrestles with the drink. Should I, shouldn't I? Oh, every time I do it, I feel shit. I hate it. But when I have a drink, I love it. So I didn't really have an issue. And when I talk to people about that I've quit drinking, I find that it's met a lot with like defense. Whereas I've got a friend who quit drinking because his life was becoming a mess and everyone's giving him a round of applause. But with me, it's like, I don't know if they put themselves in my shoes and feel like I'm trying to attack them the way they are or something. I don't know.
Yes.
But it's like, well, you didn't even have a drinking problem anyway. What's the point? You're always looking for problems to fix. Why can't you just be happy? And you're like, oh my God, this is quite difficult because I'm just trying to better myself. And now I'm in some sort of battle with you about it, having to justify it. And it's very easy to go, oh, maybe you're right. Maybe I should just drink every now and then because what's the problem?
Yeah, I see this all the time. I spend a lot of my time helping people lose weight, and it comes up a lot in this area. As soon as people start, so if you're letting yourself go, most people in your life will not say a word. They're glad that you've got somebody to go out on a Saturday night with. They're glad that someone's more hungover than them. Like, they're not as bad because someone else is worse, kind of thing. When you start improving yourself, putting work in to make your own life better, by simply doing that without even mentioning them, you hold a mirror up to their behavior to make them look at themselves and their inadequacies in the areas that they don't work on.
Yeah.
And it upsets them.
Yeah. Sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes people come out of the woodwork and they're inspired by what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of messages from people that I've not really ever properly spoken to. And they're like, oh, like, I've loved the story, and they're asking me questions about it. But the other side, as you just said, and this is what I was saying to my friend who was at rock bottom, for him, everyone wants to, cheer him on and bring him up. And I was saying to him, they'll do that until you surpass their level. And then those round of applause will stop and those likes and those positive, comments will start to stop because now you're going, everyone loves looking down. And, they're inspired to watching someone come from the ground up. But once you surpass them, all of a sudden, like you said, that mirror and the likes drop off and the comments and the then you start getting the digs. Oh, why can't you just be happy?
Yeah. And I'm not saying that our friends are all miserable, but misery loves company. Like when they are talking rubbish in the pub, telling the same stories, mumbling, stumbling, making a fool of themselves, as long as everyone else is doing it, it's okay. Everyone else is doing it. That is their get out. Everyone else does it. As soon as you stop doing it, you're suddenly like the sensible grown-up looking at the kids being idiotic. And you're not trying to do that. You're not being judgmental. You don't care what they do. It's their choice. You probably don't give a monkey's about what they do. But it's not even in your words or your actions towards them. It's simply in being someone who doesn't partake in that, you highlight quite how ridiculous it is, some of the behavior.
Yeah. And I think this is why it can be quite difficult for people who, I guess, like, you live in a normal life, but you're daring to dream a little bigger. Because not only could you convince yourself quite easily, I don't need to do this. I'm happy. I can actually just get on with it. Go into that next level from baseline of being all right and being relatively successful in the, the world that you live in. That's a lot of hard work. And then on top of that, all your friends and family start digging you out and holding you back. And it becomes incredibly difficult for you to kind of push through that,
Who does he think he is? He thinks he's better than everyone else. When did you ever say that? You're just better than you were yesterday. You're trying to improve yourself. That's all. Yeah. But it threatens people. And it's like, when you look at why would it threaten you? Me getting fit, me getting rid of drink, me doing a new course to get a new job. Is it because it says that you're not doing that?
Yeah. Okay, so when we started the conversation, we spoke about the shadow self in the sense of almost like putting out a bit of a persona, you know, trying to be a bit of a comedian, getting a laugh from people, but
Yeah.
really deep down, I'm not very happy. You know, it's just all a show. How would you identify the shadow self in, say, the example we're just talking about? You're starting to think, do you know what? I'm not where I should be in my life. I'm sick of going down the pub talking about the same old, you know, nonsense that I've been speaking about for 15 years. Maybe I now want to start looking at settling down. I'm getting to that age. I want to progress in my career. You know, whatever it is that you're trying to strive towards. Where's the shadow self in this example? Because at this point, it's not as clear and obvious. You're kind of living your life. You're bombarded by the news and the TV and work and your mates and opinions.
Everything that you say and do that you wouldn't say and do unless it was trying to get a reaction from someone that you'd like to get from them is inauthentic. So maybe you're a Pokemon collector, but you never discuss it with the boys at the pub. And if you take your Pokemon cards to the pub when they're watching the football and you lay them out and you try and explain the special characters, you'll be more, yeah, you laugh because you would be socially ostracized.
Yeah.
Because you're not got the uniform on, and the uniform is how you speak, what you speak about. You're in that group of sheep. The shadow work in that little example is accept that those friends are not actually maybe the right friends for you. So you're going to have to risk the rejection of that and maybe find a bloody Pokemon society or whatever Pokemon, you know, but something that's actually true to you, and it will cost you the acceptance of those that you're familiar with, that maybe you rely on in the sense for social acceptance.
Yeah.
But the reward is you get to be authentically you with your Pokemon cards.
Yeah. And what you might find in that example is you express who you really are and what you're really into, and they might actually accept it. And then it's not an issue.
Yeah.
But you kind of build up this.
It's a risk. And instead, if you put on your Timberlands and your Burberry shirt and you go to the pub and you shout at the telly that the referee's a wanker and you drink your pints of heavy, you're just one of the guys, no feathers ruffled. But if you turn up in your baseball cap and your, you know, goofy high tops and with your Pokemon cards in your bum bag, they don't want to be your friends anymore. So your choice is conform or be you. But we want to belong. We want acceptance. Yeah. So, and there's biological reasons for being part of the herd and all sorts of stuff there. But it's inauthentic. And that's the danger of it, that it's your mask that's seeking acceptance that's out at the pub. It's not the real you. The real you wishes you had friends that were into Pokemon and you could play what, you know, whatever, like your real passions and interests and stuff. Yeah. And all of us, they're maybe not always as extreme as Pokemon or the football, but there's always parts of us that are unsatiated and unsatisfied by what we do because we're not willing to risk being really us because it might mean rejection.
Yeah. Do you think that what you're saying, so if we take the Pokemon card side, you know, thing aside, do you think that this is potentially, to some degree or another, what can cause addiction in people or certain behaviors or?
Yeah. Absolutely. So the more that you, so this is what I was saying about the further you are from your true self and the mask, the further they are apart from each other. So the more that you're just living as a mask out in the world and you never, ever get acceptance, love, like adulation or anything, your real self never gets any of it because it's pure mask. Then suddenly you are so unsatisfied and unhappy with life and can't cope with, you never get any human interaction, your mask does. That eventually the pain of that, the pain of never having love, acceptance, company, all those things, recognition, people then start to try to cope with the discrepancy between them to their true selves with substances. So if I have a few beers, so man, you know, bloke goes to work and he's a geezer at work and he's, you know, how the character that he is at work, and then he picks up a few beers on the way home. Well, if he sits at home and has a few beers, which dulls your senses, then he's not sitting tearing himself up about the fact that he'd never got any satisfaction from that day because it was not really him that was at work. And if they knew the real him, then they wouldn't like him and accept him and think he was funny, because he's not that person. That's just a clown that he's sending out to perform on his behalf. That is like a tragic truth that people struggle with. And so a few beers means you don't have to think about it, and you get lost in Netflix or Xbox or an early night, and so we're looking for escapism all the time, and substances are certainly an effective escapism from the difficult feelings that we have, often about being inauthentic out in the world.
Do you think that, you get some people that are driven by, chasing money or success, or, it could be anything, laughs or women or drugs or drink or gambling. These are all like, you're almost creating this like perpetual cycle of trying to, I don't know, that void between the authentic self and, like you say, the shadow. And instead of just sort of doing the work, as we're saying, you keep pushing the limit to the point of, breakdown or whatever it is, rock bottom, as we said, which could be based on the gambling, the drink and drugs or whatever.
Yeah. So two things. One is, when we have difficult feelings that we don't want to look at, our brain kind of pushes them away and tries to lock them in a bunker and make sure they don't come back. And so we try and busy our mind or distract our mind to save thinking about those things. So that's where we use the gym or football or drinking or Netflix or whatever. And yeah, that is really, really, really common. I can't remember my second point. What were you talking about again?
Well, in terms of, so let's just sort of go into what you just said there. You mentioned the gym, right? So I, for one, and I know others, they become a bit obsessed with the gym. I'm not obsessed in the sense of like taking, loads of protein shakes and steroids, and I'm not that bothered, but I won't skip the gym. I'm there, every day that I set myself to be there. And it's almost like, it's a more positive way of running away. So, my friend that I mentioned that hit rock bottom, he's now obsessed with ice baths. Every day he's doing the ice bath. So he's almost handed his power straight to the ice bath now. And he's like, yeah, but it's a lot better than what I was doing before. But it's like, okay, it is in the physical world, but is it really?
Well, we develop addictions to satiate an emotional need. So we're filling an emotional hole with a behavior or a substance. So yeah, there are two ways to look at that. One, heal the thing that needs healing, and then you no longer need the behavior or the substance to fill the hole. Or find a series of addictions that are actually good for you. If you're addicted to meditation, ice baths, and yoga, you ain't going to get particularly unhappy doing those things, really. Now, of course, if they are in fact addictions, then you could say, well, am I still running? Am I still running from something emotionally? Maybe it's time to look at that.
Yeah. Maybe ride it for a bit until the future sort of damaging path is behind you, and then maybe start looking at it and going, right.
Absolutely. Steady the ship. Yeah. So stop the drinking or the drugs or the fighting or whatever it is, and steady that ship. So like change the behavior. And if you have to surrogate a different behavior, that's the gym, that's yoga, that's ice baths, that's meticulous eating, something that's actually quite good for you, then that's pretty much an improvement. Obviously, is less destructive than the other earlier behavior. If then you can be stable enough to then start looking at the whys, and so that you can undo some of the patterns that you've built up in your mind that are self-limiting beliefs, basically, then that's a great time to do that. Not when
it's a good time to do it when you're addicted to the ice bath, because if you relapse, you're running back to the ice bath and not the drug dealer. The other thing, even more subtle than that, right? So things like personality traits, like for instance, people pleasers. Someone could be a people pleaser, and now I wear it as a guard of honor. I'm just a people pleaser. But again, why? What is that? And let's say if you were dealing with somebody, if you had a client who was a chronic people pleaser, what are you thinking? Like, why?
I know exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
What I'm thinking is you don't have any self-worth and you think that you'll get your value from someone else. That if you just run around enough people enough of the time, then you will feel valuable because they value you because you keep doing whatever they want. And if I just do more, if I just do one more task, if I just do their shopping, and they think that there is acceptance or there is happiness and approval from someone. And there never is. It can never be enough. Because
do you think that's conditional love as a child, or
it can be a whole host of things. Yeah, absolutely. It can be. So like it comes from no self-worth, because if you value yourself, you can do things for people if you're available to do them when you've got time and inclination, or they're a kind person, you reciprocate their kindness. There can be like it's not people pleaser or never help anyone. There is a healthy middle ground. Yeah. Except when you're doing it, almost everyone is a people pleaser. If you say, you ever feel like a doormat? They say, yes. You say to them, do you feel like you've got MUG written across your forehead? They say, God, yes. Do you like yourself? God, no. Like, there are commonalities in all people pleasers, that they are pleasing others because they don't get happiness from who they are about themselves and their actions. Yeah. They're trying to get that happiness poured into them rather than recognizing their own value. So poor boundaries, doing too much for others, giving far more to others than ever getting back themselves, accepting poor treatment of them. Like, all of these go hand in hand with a people pleaser. And it all stems from no self-worth for a whole host of reasons. A bully, a parent, trauma, loads of things.
Yeah. Do you know, one of the things I've come to the conclusion of quite recently, actually. So with me, I'm not a people pleaser at all. If anything, I'm the other way. I'm a contrarian. I almost want to piss people off. Don't know why, but what I do in terms of like friends and family is, when it comes to like arranging things, I will add like the strings attached, right? And the reason I do that is because I've realized that I'm actually terrified of rejection, right? So for instance, as a friend of mine, the best thing you could ever do is ring me up and say, Jay, do you fancy a walk? And we'll have a chat. We'll have a deep chat. I'm like, yes, I'll be there now. Even if I've got plans, I'm willing to cancel them plans, because for me, that's really important. But I would never ask someone to do that myself. I will say, do you fancy playing golf? Or what you doing Saturday? Do you want to go gym? Or what you doing, I'm going to take the dog out. Do you want to come? Like, I will always put something there as a barrier. So if they reject, they're rejecting the thing and not me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's quite observant of you about your own behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite deep. And I sort of just come to the conclusion myself, like, oh my God. But I've got a friend who does ring me up and offers, he's like, come round Friday night. And I'm like, to do what? And he's like, just nothing. And I'll say to my missus, I'm like, who does he think I am? Does he think I've got nothing better to do? And I get annoyed about it, but I'm like, that's actually what I want. So I sort of put a barrier up as well sometimes. It's really weird. But the other thing is as well is, like, with my friends, if I know they're in any sort of trouble, I'm the first to be there. I've already read 9 books on the subject. I'm here to help you, right? Or if there's a topic, I've already gone and studied it for a year, and I know all the information, and I'm here to help you with it. Come to me. I know everything about everything. And I've started to come to the realization that I think that, like, I always have to be the smartest in the situation, or the most knowledgeable, or, if it's like martial arts, I have to be the best. And I think it is because, like I said, with the situation with my dad and my mum, my dad always had different women. It wasn't, that sort of person in a sense, but he'd be with someone for a year or two and then it'd end. And I'm like, there's another stepmom gone. And I think what I've done is I've created this belief system of, for you to be in my life, I have to give you something. I have to make you want to be there by offering something. Do you get what I mean? So it's not necessarily people pleaser. It's more, like,
Try
why would you?
enough.
I think that's what it was. So essentially, I've probably looked at, you know, the various different stepmums as a child, or my mum, you know, my dad falling out at me, not seeing my mum, as like, it has to be because I'm not good enough. So now I need to spend every waking day preempting being good enough in any situation. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get that. Do you think that there's any part of you, or was there any part of you at the time that felt responsible for the women in your dad's life leaving?
Yeah, 100%. That's another thing, is always felt like a burden. You know, my dad was 20 when he had me. So I had he was a single 20-year-old. Well, by the time they broke up, he was like 23.
Yeah.
So he's 23 and he's got this 3-year-old kid, and, you know, he's trying to live his life. And let's be honest, that is a burden. You know, as much as I'm there as his son, and it's not nice to kind of admit that, but essentially, yeah, I probably spent most of my childhood as a burden, pushed from pillar to post. You know, if my nan ever had me, it'd be like, oh, all right, I'll have him then. You know, it was never like that sort of like loving. You know, if I look at my friends now who have got kids, we treat our kids so well now. It's like, what did you do Saturday? Oh, we took so and so to the zoo, and then we got an ice cream, and then we went to play 360, and he met his friends, and I just sat there in silence and watched them play, and it was joyous. It was amazing. When we were kids, it was like, get in the back of the car, we're going to the DIY shop. You know, you stay out of the way. You're better off seen and not heard. You know, you're sort of dragged around. I think it was probably just what was a bit more normal back then. You know, I spent most of my time just on the heels of my dad, and I didn't have a stable place to be. He couldn't just be like, oh, stay at home with your mum, I'm going out. He'd be like, Jay, you got to come with me. There's no choice, you have to. So I think essentially that, and then all these years later, I mean, mine's quite obvious when I think about it, but yeah, the thought of someone just being in my life because they just want to be is like, why? I just think, why? You know, it's like such a rigid belief that I have. But I don't look at anyone else like that. I look at other people, I go, oh, he's my mate because he's just my mate. You know, he's never done anything for me, but I don't want anything from him. He's just my mate. But with me, it's like, why would you be my mate? I haven't done anything for you, you know?
Yeah. Valued, you consider yourself valued for what you do, not who you are.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And so you must be always improving and being the best, and to prove your value, your worth, so you don't get discarded.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's tiring, man.
Well, what would be funny is if you stopped all of it, the podcast, the learning, the job, those that love you would still love you exactly the same. Those who value you still value the same. They value you, who you are. They don't want anything from you.
Do you know, when you just said if you stopped it all, my immediate thought was, you got no chance. Just immediately, nah.
I know.
Yeah. It is wild, isn't it? I think this is how deep these things go. And I'm someone that, you know, certainly I've not mastered anything, but I've spent a lot of time on this. I've come to this conclusion, you know, through long walks, and, you know, I did a video, posted it last week, of, you know, mindfulness meditation. And essentially what I was saying is, being mindful is, you know, or you know, being in places of silence and not thinking is great, but what are you running from? And when I sort of do meditation, or I just spend time in silence, the thoughts and the fears and the worries that pop up, I've been really kind of, you know, looking at them and you know, trying to figure out what, you know, why is that? And then I think back and I'm like, shit, that actually makes sense. And it's like a puzzle, and I'm sort of piecing it all together. But the rigidness of who I am, the OCD I have of all of these, you know, with all of these things I'm talking about, you know, I can't drop it. I just can't. Maybe I will eventually, and then I can live in peace. But like, there's a girl that sits next to me. She's at work, and she's like, saying, "Oh, I wanted to go gym today, but you know, I just couldn't be bothered, so I stayed in bed." And you know, she's quite happy with that. I'm pulling my hair out. I'm like, "Are you mental? Get up and go. Go 3 times in a day." In my head, I'm like, you know, I go gym at lunch, martial arts in the evening, and I'll do that 3 times a week. And I go gym, you know, 4 or 5 times a week. I'll go for a run. So in my head, I'm like, "You're on the go, man. You've got to be. You've got," because I'm chasing something, obviously. And she's
Well,
just,
you're either chasing something or you're running from something.
yeah, yeah. And with her, she's like, "Meh." And
Yeah.
I'm looking at her like,
Can you stop? Are you able to stop?
"What do you mean, stop?"
Like, chill, not actively take on a task every second of every day.
Oh, it's hard work. It's
Right.
hard,
So that's
especially like,
escapism. So some people binge watch Netflix, some people drink alcohol. We use the outside world and activities because it occupies our conscious mind
yeah,
and distracts us from our hauntings, you might call it.
yeah,
As soon as you stop, like just chill, the thoughts that you're running from start to play on your mind. So
yeah,
that's why you busy yourself all the time.
yeah,
What?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I spend active time in silence. Like I'll go out for a nice long walk. I leave my phone at home, and I'm just, you know, the biggest problem I have is when I sit watching TV. If I'm sitting watching TV, my mind is gone. I'm on it, and then I'm like, and then I'm in my head. So that I'm like, I've got to turn this TV off. It drives me to that place of, you know, complete chaos. But when I'm in a, not necessarily, it's the OCD, in a controlled environment, left alone, like a walk in the woods, I tend to be okay. I think the worrying thing for me is I've done a lot of work, and I'm just like, man, this thing goes deeper. And it's almost like, you know, I've dug a little hole, and I'm like, wow. And then I'm like, fucking hell, this thing. And then I keep digging. I'm like, oh my, there's dead bodies in here. And then it's just like, it just keeps going and going. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah,
Right.
that's the,
I've got a challenge for you then.
go on.
A question I'd like you to ask yourself in those quiet moments or the enforced quiet moments. What would I have to let go of to have peace?
I'll write this down. What would I have to let go of?
To have or to find peace?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any immediate answer. That's going to be one of those that could take a long time.
Yeah. And when you realize, you'll know.
Yeah.
Like, of course it's that. Of course it is.
Yeah. See, this is the thing for having these sort of realizations over the years, and forgiving as well, a lot of forgiving. You know, I've had the conversation with my mum, for instance. It took me years. It took me 10 years to face the conversation. We met, and we were fine, got on, and then we fell out, and and over like 8 years I didn't speak to her again. And it sort of just hit me in the face. It's like, I have to know. I just have to know. And then I was man enough to sit down and have the conversation, and it turned out it actually wasn't even close to what I always thought it was.
Yeah.
It's complicated. She didn't run away. It was actually a different situation entirely. It was probably both of them at fault, not, you know, not just one. It never is that, is it? It's always, you know, more complicated. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think yeah, I'm glad you come on for this. I didn't think it'd turn out to be therapy.
Yeah, I became aware of that. I'm like, shit, this is a therapy session. But that's no bad thing. And because you're brave enough to say, these have been my thoughts over the years, these are the things I have addressed, these are the things I've struggled with. I would like to think that the guys watching, you know, guys and girls watching, that they have stuff, they have behaviors that maybe they've noticed that they do, or things that they've lived through, and they wonder how it's impacted their life, because it probably has. And so theory's great. We can talk about Jung and Freud and repression and revenge of the repressed and all these concepts, and And it's interesting stuff, really is. But by you being brave enough to talk about you, it becomes real.
I didn't want to. I did. Obviously, we were going down that route, and I thought, all right, let's have it. And then it just goes deeper, and before you know it, you forgot you're actually on a podcast, and you're like, oh my god,
Yeah.
I can't even edit this. I've got to post this. This is raw. Yeah. I think
I
if
think
it,
that'll be really useful for people.
yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Well, what you verbalized, millions of people are doing in their head,
Yeah.
but they don't tell their best friend or their partner or their mum or dad or anyone. They wrestle, especially blokes who
Oh,
are
yeah.
at the gym 3-5 times a week, that are maybe hammering it too much at the weekend on the booze, or wondering whether they should be given knocking it on the head, or loads of things that you've mentioned. Millions of people are experiencing all the time.
Yeah, mate. That's the thing. That's why I do try and, open up and talk about these things, because it is serious, and most people don't realize that the biggest problem here is actually going on in your own head, and it's that distractive mechanism. You're distracting yourself. And I was looking, I've mentioned him so many times on different podcasts, but Dr. John Sarno, and he was talking about, this can go so deep that your body can actually create symptoms to distract you from the psychological side, because dealing with it can destroy people. It normally won't. It will normally be fine, and it will, in many cases, if not all cases, actually, it'll be the best thing you've ever done. I've got miles to go, but God, I'm so glad I'm doing the work, because my life's just getting better and better on this basis. And one of the things that I think about a lot is, when I do figure this all out, and I'm gonna figure it out, I get to live the rest of my life in peace. And I've smelt the peace. I've felt it. I said this on a couple of different interviews as well. I was seeing like a woman. She's like a life coach, business coach, and psychologist and stuff. And she just sort of come out of nowhere, and she's like, "You always say I think. I've never heard you say I feel." And I'm like, what what's that got to do with anything? And for me at the time, I was like, I'm a man. I don't feel. And then I've sort of really gone away and thought about it. And I've noticed that since I've started to be more aware of what I feel, I'm just so much more open. Like you said, with the shield around the heart, once you start to break that down, you realize you're not necessarily blocking things from coming to the heart. You're also blocking your heart. Once you break that down, and I do say I feel quite a lot. People will notice, oh, you said I feel now. Oh, yeah. And you do start to actually feel, rather than living in your head and just think.
Yeah.
So for me, it feels like a lot of work that I've done. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, maybe the little work I've done, the peace it's given me already is massive. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to sit here on this podcast. I'm up and about. I couldn't even sit still. I'd do the podcast over audio, because I wouldn't want to sit here in front of a screen for 2 hours. I need to be out in the woods walking, distracted. So again, what are you running from?
So if it's a scale of peace that you're looking for, now you're able to sit for an hour and have a conversation without pacing. And so, yes, still journey to do, but a massive amount of progress already made. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else here? I feel like I've been sidetracked and I've kind of lost the structure.
No, we're not. We're talking about human behavior, and it all comes in together.
Yeah.
Making life better by dealing with your shit. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So you can call that shadow work, you can call it therapy, you can call it, there's lots of terms, lots of techniques, lots of stuff about it out there. We're talking about people go through shit, they end up stuck in patterns of thought and behavior. How do you go about making your life better? And essentially how to begin the process of going about changing old ways of thinking and old patterns of behavior. I would say that's pretty useful for people if they choose to receive it.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Are you taking clients on at the moment that are outside of the field that's making you a millionaire?
Yeah, I mean, I am. I'm a busy boy, but yes. Generally, if people want to, I don't know if you could put my phone number, my email address, and stuff, maybe in the description of this video or whatever, then they can give me a shout, even if it's just for a little chat and it's not for official therapy.
Yeah.
I like people and I like chatting, so always happy to kind of hear from anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a email address, the Scottish Hypnotherapist at gmail.com. Actually, I've got Edward at edwardaddison.com as well. There's another email address. Maybe put my phone number in. Most people get in touch with me by phone, by WhatsApp, actually, just a wee message. I'm not very chinos and open neck shirt and like welcome to my clinic. I'm a real person that's been through shit. I, enthusiastically study human behavior, and I help a lot of people make changes in their life for the better. So there's no pretense. There's no, I'm not pretending to be a GP. It's just real.
Yeah. I think this conversation will probably quite clearly detail that. But the last one we had was very much on suggestion and hypnotherapy and things like this, whereas this is more, you can do a lot of, well, the wrong term is damage, but I'm going to say damage. You can do a lot of damage to, someone's negative thought processes just by asking a simple question sometimes. And, as you've seen, what just happened there is I go on a little rant and you'll say something that almost stops me square in my tracks, and it's just sometimes just a slight change in perception can sort of change the way you see things. And I think you're right as well, what you said about men. There's definitely, it's becoming more acknowledged now. You're starting to see people talk about it a lot more now, but men's mental health has been thrown in the bin for years. And we live in a society that's so busy trying to fix everything that we're kind of, discarding our own feelings and thoughts. And, a lot of men now, they're just being ignored, and they feel like, well, I can't really speak up because there's people that are worse off than me on the surface anyway. And there's something about men talking. Men are opening up. More and more, but they tend to just want to sort of take on the world and just drown themselves.
Yeah. I work with a lot of men who they kind of see it like, what's the point of telling you about my woes? Nothing can be done about it. And they can be quite rigid in their, this is how it is. Talking about it is not going to change anything. And I would say, yeah, but talking about it is half the battle. Understanding where behaviors are coming from or thinking patterns are coming from is half the battle. Then it's, how do you implement change? That's the second half of the task. It's not just because you could talk about your childhood and the whys forever, but it's like, well, what are you doing that's fucking up your life? Stop doing it. How do we get you to stop doing it? What would your life need to include more of to be better? How do we make actionable tasks to make that part of your life? And so there are real world, not hug a tree and howl at the moon, not weep into a tissue. Like, men have a misconception of what therapy is, but they have to be willing to acknowledge that there is some thinking that they're doing that is wrong, and that their behavior is their responsibility, and that they have to change to make their life better. Not simply say, well, this is it, this is what it is, and that's it, tough luck. It's not like that. Life can be infinitely better if you're willing to look into the shadows, if you're willing to look at the uncomfortable truths about yourself, about your past, about your family, about whatever it is, and actually willing to put work in to do things differently so life gets better. When you do that, life gets better.
Yeah. Preach, my man. Preach.
Pleasure to be on, mate. Absolute pleasure to speak.
Yeah. No, that was awesome. Thank you for that. I'll share your details, as I said, and yeah, always welcome on the show, mate. Really, really appreciate it.
Tremendous, man. Thank you. Thanks again.